Some girls dream of being rescued by a prince. I was bought by a king, whose crown was made of blood and whose castle was built on secrets that could destroy us both. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of our third-floor apartment, like angry fists demanding entry. Each droplet that slipped through the loose frame landed on the mismatched furniture below, creating a steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack of my life. I climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, my backpack heavy with architecture textbooks and the weight of another 16-hour day behind me. At 22, I felt ancient. While other students my age worried about parties and dating, I juggled a full course load with shifts at Café Luna, trying to keep our heads above water. The rent was 3 weeks overdue, the electricity bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter, and my father's promises had become as reliable as his sobriety. "Dad?" I called, pushing open the apartment door. The familiar smell hit me immediately. Stale beer mixed with defeat and broken dreams. "Please tell me you went to that construction interview today." Marcus Martinez sat hunched over our second-hand dining table, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey serving as his only companion. At 55, he looked 70. His dark hair now streaked with premature gray, and his once strong hands shaking as he lifted the glass to his lips. "Isabella, mija," he slurred, not bothering to look up. "You're home early. It's past 11, Dad. I worked a double shift after classes, remember?" I dropped my bag and surveyed the disaster zone that was supposed to be our home. Empty bottles lined the windowsill like trophies of failure. The Hendersons called about the rent again. Mrs. Henderson was actually crying when she told me they might have to evict us. My father's laugh was bitter, hollow. Eviction. Such a polite word for throwing people into the streets. "Then do something about it." The words exploded from me before I could stop them. "Apply for jobs. Show up to interviews sober. Stop drinking away what little money we have left." For the first time that evening, he looked at me directly. His brown eyes, so similar to mine, were bloodshot and filled with something that looked like guilt. "You think it's that simple, Isabella? You think I haven't tried? Have you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've given up completely." I moved to the kitchen, such as it was, and began cleaning the mess he'd left behind. Dirty dishes, overflowing ashtrays, the detritus of a man who'd stopped caring about anything except the bottom of a bottle. "I used to build things," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "Beautiful things. Skyscrapers, bridges, monuments that would last forever." I'd heard this speech before. The golden days when Marcus Martinez was a respected foreman. When my mother was still alive. When we lived in a real house instead of this cramped apartment that smelled like other people's dreams had come to die. That was before Mom died, Dad. That was 12 years ago. At some point, you have to move forward. Some things you can't move forward from, mija. Some debts follow you forever. The way he said it made me pause, a plate halfway to the sink. "What debts? Dad, what are you talking about?" But he'd already returned to his bottle, retreating into the alcohol-fueled haze that had become his preferred reality. I finished cleaning in silence, my mind churning with possibilities I didn't want to consider. My father had always been dramatic when he drank, prone to cryptic statements that meant nothing in the harsh light of morning. At exactly 11:23, someone began pounding on our door. Not knocking, pounding, with the kind of authority that suggested the person on the other side didn't much care whether they woke the entire building. The sound reverberated through our thin walls like gunshots, each impact making our cheap furniture rattle. My father went rigid, the color draining from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. The glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor and sending whiskey and shards of glass in every direction. "Dad, don't answer it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the continued assault on our door. "Isabella, whatever happens, don't open that door." But it was too late. The pounding stopped, replaced by the unmistakable sound of metal against metal. Someone was picking our lock with professional efficiency. The door swung open to reveal 3 men in expensive suits, water dripping from their shoulders despite the covered hallway. They moved with the predatory grace of sharks scenting blood in the water, their eyes scanning our pathetic apartment with undisguised contempt. The first man through the door was built like a refrigerator, with hands that looked capable of crushing bones, and a face that suggested he'd done exactly that on multiple occasions. The second was leaner, but no less dangerous, with the kind of scars that spoke of violence survived rather than avoided. But it was the third man who stole my breath and froze my blood simultaneously. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 28 or 30, with the kind of devastating good looks that belonged on magazine covers rather than in my shabby living room. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble by Renaissance masters. His suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and he wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never known want or need. But it was his eyes that truly terrified me. Pale blue, almost colorless, they held the kind of cold intelligence that missed nothing and forgave less. When they settled on me, I felt like prey being evaluated by an apex predator. "Marcus Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. Italian, maybe, wrapped around words that held absolute authority. "You've been avoiding my calls." My father struggled to his feet, swaying dangerously. "Mr. Gambino, I wasn't expecting you to come personally. When a man owes me $2 million and then disappears, I take a personal interest in the matter. $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow, so large and impossible that my mind initially rejected it entirely. My father, who couldn't scrape together enough money for rent, somehow owed this dangerous stranger more money than most people saw in a lifetime. "I can explain," my father began. But the man, Gambino, held up a single finger for silence. "Your explanations have been notably absent for the past 6 months, Marcus, as have your payments." Those pale eyes shifted to me again, and I felt my skin prickle with awareness. "Your daughter. She wasn't mentioned in our original contract." "Leave her out of this," my father said, finding some backbone despite his obvious terror. "Isabella has nothing to do with my business. Your business became my business the moment you defaulted on our agreement." Gambino stepped closer to me, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. "Isabella Martinez, 22 years old, architecture student at Metropolitan University, works part-time at Cafe Luna on 5th Street. The fact that he knew so much about me made my mouth go dry with fear. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about the people who owe me money, Miss Martinez. And their families." His gaze swept over our pathetic living room, taking in the broken furniture, the water stains on the ceiling, the general air of desperation that clung to everything like smoke. "Though I must say, seeing your living conditions makes it clear that your father's debt is unlikely to be resolved through conventional means." "What kind of debt?" I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "How does someone owe $2 million? My father made a strangled sound of protest, but Gambino's cold smile silenced him. "Gambling debts, Miss Martinez. Your father has an unfortunately expensive habit of betting on outcomes he cannot control. Football games, boxing matches, horse races. For the past 3 years he's been borrowing money to cover his losses, always promising that the next bet would be the one to make everything right." The room tilted around me. 3 years. For 3 years, while I'd been killing myself trying to keep us afloat, my father had been systematically destroying any chance we had at a normal life. "I can get the money," I heard myself say, though I had no idea how. "Give me time, I'll figure something out." $2 million, Miss Martinez. At your current income rate, you'd need approximately 47 years to earn that much. Assuming, of course, that you never spent a penny on trivial things like food or shelter. "Then what do you want?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Gambino studied me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing something I didn't understand, something that had nothing to do with money or debt or the desperate mathematics of poverty. "Your father has 3 days to present me with $2 million, Miss Martinez. If he cannot produce the money, then I'll be forced to collect payment in other ways." His pale eyes never left mine, and I assure you, the alternatives are far less pleasant for everyone involved. He turned to leave, his men falling into formation around him like a well-rehearsed dance. But at the door he paused, looking back over his shoulder with an expression I couldn't read. 3 days, Marcus. Don't make me come looking for you again." The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow carried more menace than if they'd slammed it hard enough to shake the building. I stood frozen in the center of our ruined living room, trying to process what had just happened. $2 million, 3 days, and a man with pale eyes who looked at me like I was the answer to a question I didn't understand. The call came at exactly 10 in the morning, 36 hours after Alessandro Gambino had walked out of our apartment and taken my sense of security with him. I was sitting in advanced structural design, desperately trying to focus on Professor Williams's lecture about load-bearing calculations, when my phone vibrated against the desk. Unknown number. My stomach clenched with instant dread. "Miss Martinez." That familiar voice flowed through the phone like expensive whiskey over ice. "I trust you've had time to consider our conversation." Around me, students scribbled notes and sketched diagrams, blissfully unaware that my world was crumbling in real time. I slipped out of the classroom and into the hallway, pressing my back against the cold concrete wall. "My father doesn't have $2 million, I whispered. "You know he doesn't have it. I know many things about your father, Isabella. May I call you Isabella?" He didn't wait for permission. "I know that he lost his construction job due to a gambling incident involving his foreman's wages. I know that he's defaulted on 17 different loans in the past 2 years. I know that your mother's life insurance was the only thing that kept you from being homeless when you were 17. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. How could this stranger know more about my family's history than I did? What I'm curious about," he continued, "is you. A young woman sacrificing her youth to support a father who has repeatedly betrayed her trust. Most people would have walked away by now. He's my father. And loyalty is admirable. It's also something I value highly in my business relationships." A pause that stretched just long enough to make me nervous. "I'd like to discuss alternative arrangements. Are you available this afternoon? I have classes. Miss Martinez, your father owes me $2 million. In 24 hours, if that debt remains unpaid, alternative collection methods will be implemented. I suggest you reevaluate your priorities." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the middle of a busy hallway, while students flowed around me like water around a stone. 24 hours. The 3 days he'd originally given us had somehow become one. I skipped my remaining classes and took the bus to the address he'd texted me, watching the city transform as we moved from my rundown neighborhood toward the wealthy suburbs. The houses grew larger, the lawns more manicured, the cars more expensive. By the time I reached my stop, I felt like an alien visiting a foreign planet. The mansion that rose before me belonged in architectural magazines, not reality. Clean lines of glass and stone created a structure that seemed to flow seamlessly into the landscaped grounds surrounding it. Water features and strategic lighting turned the approach into something resembling a work of art. 2 men in dark suits flanked the front entrance, their bulging jackets suggesting they were armed. They nodded respectfully as I approached, as if young women in discount store clothing regularly visited this fortress of wealth and power. "Miss Martinez," one of them said, "Mr. Gambino is expecting you." The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The foyer alone could have housed my entire apartment, with marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, and a staircase that curved upward in an elegant spiral. Original artwork adorned the walls, pieces I recognized from textbooks, but had never expected to see in someone's home. Impressive, isn't it? Alessandro appeared from a side corridor, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in luxury. My grandmother insisted on Italian marble throughout the main floor. She said anything less would be an insult to our heritage. He looked different in daylight, younger somehow, but no less dangerous. The perfectly tailored suit emphasized his athletic build, and I caught myself noticing details I shouldn't. The way his dark hair caught the light, the small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested a violent past. "Isabella Martinez," he said, as if testing the way my name felt in his mouth. 22 years old, graduated valedictorian from Lincoln High, despite working 30 hours a week to support your family. Full scholarship to Metropolitan University, based on a design portfolio that your professors described as extraordinary for someone your age. How do you know all this? Alessandro gestured for me to follow him through corridors lined with more priceless art. Knowledge is power, Isabella. The more I understand about the people in my life, the better I can serve their needs. He led me into a study that looked like something from a European castle. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that appeared to be first editions, and a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it, windows offered a view of gardens that stretched toward the horizon. "Please sit." Alessandro settled into the chair behind the desk, while I perched nervously on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than my tuition. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Wine? Water?" "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. I wasn't fine. I was terrified, overwhelmed, and desperately out of place in this monument to wealth. "Very well. Let's discuss your father's situation." Alessandro opened a file folder and withdrew several photographs, spreading them across the desk where I could see them. These were taken at various locations around the city. As you can see, your father's gambling extends beyond simple sports betting. The images showed my father at underground poker games, illegal casinos, and private clubs I didn't recognize. In each photo, he looked increasingly desperate, increasingly broken. 3 years ago, Marcus Martinez was a functioning alcoholic with a minor gambling problem. Today, he's a severe addict who will bet on anything. Dice games, card games, which raindrop will reach the bottom of a window first. Alessandro's voice held no judgment, just clinical assessment. "Men like your father are valuable to people like me, Isabella. They're predictable, manageable, and they always come back for more. Then why haven't you cut him off?" "Because 3 months ago, he offered me something more valuable than money." Alessandro leaned back in his chair, those pale eyes studying my reaction. "He offered me his daughter." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" "Oh, not in so many words. But when a man runs out of money, out of possessions, out of hope, he starts making promises he has no right to make." Alessandro stood and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Your father suggested that you might be willing to work off his debt in a more personal capacity." Bile rose in my throat. "My father would never..." "Wouldn't he?" Alessandro turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "A desperate man will sacrifice anything to feed his addiction, Isabella. Family, dignity, his daughter's future. The question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to save him?" "I don't understand what you're asking." "I'm asking you to marry me." The words hung in the air between us like a blade suspended by thread. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "A business arrangement," Alessandro clarified, as if discussing the weather. "You become my wife, and your father's debt disappears. You continue your education. I'll even arrange for you to transfer to a better program if you prefer. You'll want for nothing materially. And in exchange, you belong to me. Completely." His pale eyes held mine with unwavering intensity. "You take my name, live in my house, appear at my side when required. You provide heirs to continue the Gambino legacy. You're talking about buying me. I'm talking about saving your life." Alessandro moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne again, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken despite my fear. "Your father's debt extends beyond my organization, Isabella. He owes money to people far less reasonable than I am, people who would use you in ways that would break you completely before discarding what's left." A man appeared in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered with graying temples and the kind of weathered face that spoke of violence survived. "Boss, the Romano meeting in 15 minutes. "Cancel it, Marco." Alessandro didn't take his eyes off me. "Miss Martinez and I are still negotiating." Marco Torino, I realized. Alessandro's right-hand man, the one who'd been mentioned in hushed conversations at the cafe whenever customers discussed the Gambino family. He looked at me with curious assessment before nodding and disappearing. "Marco's been with me for 8 years," Alessandro explained. "Since I took over the family business. He's completely loyal, completely trustworthy. These are the kinds of people you'd be surrounded by, Isabella. Protection, security, stability. At 28, you run an entire criminal organization." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I inherited the business when my father was killed. Some inheritances come with trust funds and summer homes. Mine came with enemies and blood debts." He returned to his desk, withdrawing another file. "But it also came with resources. The documents he showed me were financial records, bank accounts, investment portfolios, business holdings that stretched across multiple states and countries. The numbers were staggering. The Gambino family controls legitimate businesses worth over $500 million. Construction companies, restaurants, real estate development, import-export operations. Alessandro's finger traced across spreadsheets that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all I understood them. We employ over 3,000 people directly, and our activities support countless more. All legal? The vast majority. Some activities exist in gray areas that allow for more flexible interpretation of regulations, but nothing that would endanger the long-term stability of the organization. I stared at the documents, trying to wrap my mind around the scale of what he was showing me. Why would you want to marry someone like me? You could have anyone. I could have anyone willing to marry me for my money. That's not the same thing. Alessandro closed the file and leaned forward, his intense gaze holding mine. I've watched you for months, Isabella. The way you care for your father despite his failures. The way you've sacrificed your own happiness to keep your family together. That kind of loyalty. That strength of character. It can't be bought. You've been watching me? I make it my business to understand everyone connected to my interests. Your father became my concern the moment he started borrowing money from my associates. Alessandro's smile was sharp. But you became my concern for entirely different reasons. This is insane. This is business. I need a wife who will provide legitimate heirs and represent the family with dignity. You need security and the kind of protection that will keep you and your father alive. He stood and moved around the desk, stopping just close enough to make me intensely aware of his presence. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. And if I refuse? Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his pale eyes. Your father dies. Painfully and publicly, as an example to others who might consider defaulting on their obligations. You'll be left to deal with his remaining creditors, who are considerably less civilized than I am. That's not a choice. That's coercion. Welcome to my world, Isabella. Alessandro returned to his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 28 years, and then some. Choice is a luxury most people can't afford. The question is, will you make the smart choice, or will you let pride destroy everything you've worked to protect? I stared at this dangerous, beautiful man, who was calmly discussing purchasing my life as if it were a business transaction. Everything I'd planned, everything I'd dreamed of, was crumbling around me. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, alternative collection methods will be implemented, and the offer expires. Alessandro's voice was gentle but implacable. Consider carefully, Isabella. Some opportunities only come once. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, Alessandro's proposition echoing in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. Marry him. Become his wife. Sign away my freedom to save my father's worthless life. By dawn, I'd convinced myself there had to be another way. The First National Bank opened at 9, and I was waiting outside when the security guard unlocked the doors. My appointment with a loan officer had been scheduled for weeks, a desperate attempt to secure student loan consolidation that might free up enough money to help with rent. Now I had bigger problems. Miss Martinez? The loan officer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a practical suit, gestured me into her office. I've reviewed your application, and I'm afraid I have disappointing news. I sat in the uncomfortable chair across from her desk, my hands clenched in my lap. What kind of disappointing news? With your current income and debt-to-income ratio, we can't approve you for any additional lending. In fact, your existing student loans are showing some concerning payment irregularities. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? According to our records, you've missed 3 payments in the past 6 months. Your account is marked as delinquent, which affects your credit worthiness for any future lending opportunities. 3 missed payments. My father had been intercepting the bills, probably selling them, or using the money for his gambling. I felt the familiar burn of betrayal mixed with helpless rage. Is there anything else I can do? Any other options? The woman's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry, Miss Martinez. Perhaps a family member could co-sign, or if you had collateral to secure the loan. I walked out of the bank feeling more defeated than when I'd entered. No loan, no money, no options except the one Alessandro had offered. The city seemed different as I made my way back toward campus. Brighter, more threatening, full of people who belonged in ways I never would. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Cafe Milano, 2 p.m. We need to discuss terms. I should have ignored it, should have gone to classes, pretended my world wasn't falling apart, maintained the illusion that I had choices. Instead, I found myself walking toward the address Alessandro had sent, each step feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Cafe Milano occupied a corner building in the financial district, the kind of place where powerful people made deals over espresso that cost more than I spent on food in a week. Through the windows, I could see businessmen in expensive suits conducting meetings that probably involved more money than my family would see in a lifetime. Alessandro sat at a corner table, looking perfectly at ease in surroundings that intimidated me just by existing. He wore a charcoal gray suit today, with a white shirt that emphasized his olive complexion and a tie that probably cost more than my rent. When he saw me approach, he stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd been taught proper manners since childhood. "Isabella, thank you for coming." He pulled out a chair for me, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt surreal given our circumstances. "I took the liberty of ordering for you. Cappuccino, no sugar, and a croissant. I hope that's acceptable." The fact that he knew my coffee preferences sent a chill down my spine. "How do you know how I drink my coffee? I told you yesterday. I make it my business to understand the people in my life." Alessandro returned to his seat, those pale blue eyes studying my face with unnerving intensity. "You look tired. Did you sleep poorly?" "I spent the night trying to figure out if there's any way out of this situation that doesn't involve selling myself to a stranger." "And what did you conclude?" I stared at the perfect cappuccino he'd ordered for me, the foam art creating a delicate pattern on the surface. "That you've made sure there aren't any alternatives. I've simply presented you with the reality of your circumstances." Alessandro's voice was gentle but implacable. "Your father's debt exists whether I'm involved or not. The consequences of his choices will unfold regardless of my preferences. You could forgive the debt. I could, but that would set a precedent that would undermine my authority and endanger everyone under my protection." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "I don't run a charity, Isabella. I run a business that employs thousands of people and supports countless families. Showing weakness invites challenges that result in violence. So this is about maintaining your reputation. This is about survival. Mine, yours, and everyone connected to both of us." Alessandro reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, setting it on the table between us. "But it's also about opportunity." I stared at the box without touching it. "What's that?" "Open it." With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid to reveal a ring that took my breath away. The center stone was a perfect diamond, at least 3 carats, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the cafe table. It was the kind of ring that appeared in magazine advertisements, the kind normal people only dreamed about. "It belonged to my grandmother," Alessandro said quietly. "She wore it for 57 years, through wars and peace, poverty and prosperity. She gave it to my father the day before she died, with instructions that it should only be given to a woman worthy of the Gambino name. I'm not worthy of anything. I'm just a broke college student whose father is a gambling addict. You're a woman who sacrificed her own happiness to care for a parent who's repeatedly betrayed your trust. You've maintained your integrity, despite having every reason to become bitter and selfish." Alessandro's hand moved across the table, his fingers almost touching mine. "That kind of strength is rarer than diamonds, Isabella. You don't know me. I know that you work double shifts to pay for your father's mistakes. I know that you've never missed a day of classes despite being exhausted and overwhelmed. I know that you volunteer at the literacy center downtown, teaching adults to read, even though you barely have time to eat." His pale eyes held mine with unsettling intensity. "I know that you cry in the bathroom at Cafe Luna when you think no one is watching. But you always wipe your tears and go back to work with a smile." The accuracy of his observations made my skin crawl. "You've been stalking me. I've been protecting you. There's a difference." Alessandro withdrew his hand, returning to the careful distance he maintained. "Marco has been ensuring your safety for the past 3 months. The reason you haven't been approached by your father's other creditors is because word has spread that you're under Gambino protection. Without my knowledge or consent, would you have preferred I let them take their chances with you? Because I can arrange that if you'd like to experience the alternatives." I thought about the men who'd visited our apartment, the cold violence in their eyes when they'd looked at me. Alessandro might be dangerous, but he'd never looked at me like I was prey to be consumed. Why marriage? Why not just hire me or something? Because marriage creates bonds that can't be easily broken. It provides legitimacy, legal protection, social standing. Alessandro's voice took on a harder edge. And because I need heirs, Isabella. The Gambino name dies with me unless I have children to carry it forward. Children. The word came out as barely a whisper. Eventually, yes. When you're ready, when you're comfortable with the arrangement. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm not a monster, Isabella. I don't force myself on unwilling women. But you'll coerce them into marriage. I'll offer them choices they wouldn't have otherwise. Alessandro gestured around the cafe at the luxury surrounding us. Look around you. This could be your life. Security, comfort, respect. No more working double shifts. No more worrying about rent. No more watching your father destroy himself with his addiction. A waiter appeared at our table, refilling our coffee cups with practiced efficiency. He moved with the kind of deference that suggested he knew exactly who Alessandro was, and what that meant for his tip. The croissant is excellent, Alessandro observed, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the terms of my captivity. French butter, imported daily. The chef here trained in Paris. I'm not hungry. You should eat anyway. You've lost weight since I first saw you, and you were already too thin. His gaze swept over me with clinical assessment. Proper nutrition will be a priority once you're living under my roof. You're talking about me like I'm a possession you're planning to maintain, aren't you? The question was asked without malice, just matter-of-fact acknowledgement. Your father has already sold you, Isabella. The only question now is whether you'll accept the terms I'm offering, or whether you'll take your chances with less civilized buyers. I stared at this beautiful, dangerous man, who was calmly discussing the purchase of my life over artisanal coffee and French pastries. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored suit to the way the staff treated him with nervous respect. What would be expected of me? Publicly, you'd be my wife. You'd attend social functions, meet with other wives in our circle, represent the family with dignity. Alessandro's fingers drummed against the table, the only sign of tension he'd displayed. Privately, you'd live in my house, take my name, and eventually provide heirs to continue the Gambino legacy. And if I say no, his pale eyes met mine with unwavering directness, then you walk out of here, and I'll never contact you again. Your father's debt will be collected through traditional means, and you'll be free to rebuild your life however you choose, after watching my father die, after watching your father face the consequences of his own choices. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I won't lie to you, Isabella. The men your father owes money to aren't known for their restraint or creativity. His death would be public, painful, and educational. And me? You'd be left to deal with his remaining creditors, who would view you as a valuable asset to be liquidated. Alessandro's voice remained calm, almost gentle, as he described horrors I couldn't fully comprehend. Some debts are inherited, Isabella. Your father's gambling has created obligations that will outlive him unless they're satisfied. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the images his words conjured. When I opened them, Alessandro was still watching me with that unsettling intensity. I need more time. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford. Alessandro signaled for the check, and the waiter appeared instantly with the bill. I've made arrangements for you to see what your life could become. Marco will pick you up at 7 tonight. I haven't agreed to anything. No, you haven't. Alessandro stood and moved around the table, stopping beside my chair. His hand settled on my shoulder, warm and heavy and possessive. But we both know you will. His touch sent an unexpected jolt of electricity through me, and I caught his scent again. That intoxicating mixture of expensive cologne and barely leashed power. When I looked up at him, something flickered in his pale eyes that I couldn't identify. Until tonight, Isabella. He left me sitting alone at the cafe table, the velvet ring box still open between my hands, and the weight of an impossible decision crushing down on me like a physical force. 2 weeks had passed since Alessandro's proposal. 2 weeks of carefully orchestrated encounters that felt like a strange courtship dance. He appeared at my university, waiting by my car with coffee and pastries from expensive cafes. He sent flowers to the coffee shop where I worked, always with handwritten notes that struck the perfect balance between romantic and respectful. He had dinner delivered to our apartment when he knew I'd be too exhausted to cook. Each interaction was calculated to show me what my life could become, and despite my resistance, I found myself looking forward to seeing him. There was something magnetic about Alessandro Gambino that went beyond his obvious wealth and power. When he looked at me, I felt like the only person in the world who mattered, but I hadn't given him an answer yet. "You're being ridiculous, Isabella," I muttered to myself as I packed my backpack for another long day of classes and work. "He's a criminal, a dangerous man who's basically trying to buy you." The logical part of my brain knew this was true, but the part that was tired of being afraid, tired of struggling, tired of watching my father destroy everything we touched, that part whispered that maybe Alessandro's offer wasn't as terrible as it seemed. I was walking across campus toward the library when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I'd learned to recognize the particular ringtone that accompanied Alessandro's calls. "Good morning, Isabella. It's barely 8 a.m., Alessandro. Don't you sleep?" "Not much." His voice held a note of something I couldn't identify. Weariness, maybe, or stress. "I need to see you. Something's happened." The urgency in his tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. "What kind of something?" "Not over the phone. Marco is already on his way to pick you up. I have classes. Cancel them." The command was soft but implacable. "This is about your safety, Isabella. Don't argue with me." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the middle of the quad, while students flowed around me like water around a stone. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to rattle Alessandro's usual calm composure. Marco's black SUV pulled up to the curb within minutes, and I climbed into the passenger seat with a growing sense of dread. The man who'd been Alessandro's right hand for 8 years looked tense, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "What's going on, Marco? Boss will explain." His voice was gruff, colored by an accent I couldn't place. "But we need to get you somewhere safe first." We drove in silence through the city, taking a route I didn't recognize toward an industrial area I'd never seen before. Warehouses and abandoned factories lined the streets, their broken windows like dead eyes staring out at a world that had moved on without them. Marco pulled up to a nondescript building that looked like every other warehouse in the district, but I noticed the subtle signs of security. Cameras hidden in strategic positions, men who tried to look casual while obviously watching our approach. Alessandro met us at the entrance, his usual impeccable appearance marred by tension lines around his eyes, and a jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater instead of his customary suit, and I realized with a start that this was the first time I'd seen him dressed casually. "Isabella." He pulled me into his arms before I could protest, holding me against his chest with desperate intensity. "Thank God you're safe." The embrace lasted only seconds, but I felt the tremor in his hands, the rapid beat of his heart against my cheek. Whatever had happened, it had genuinely frightened him. "What's wrong?" I pulled back to look at his face, seeing fear beneath the carefully controlled exterior. "You're scaring me. Your apartment was attacked this morning. Men with guns broke down the door, ransacked everything, took your father." Alessandro's pale eyes were hard as winter ice. "If you'd been there..." The world tilted around me. "My father? Is he alive?" "For now. They left this." Alessandro handed me a Polaroid photograph that showed my father tied to a chair, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with terror. On the back, someone had written, "The girl for the old man, 24 hours. My knees gave out, but Alessandro caught me before I could fall, his strong arms supporting my weight as shock crashed over me in waves. "Who did this?" "The Bratva. Russian organized crime." Alessandro guided me to a chair, his hands gentle but firm. "They've been moving into our territory for months, testing boundaries, seeing how far they can push before we push back." "But why my father? Why me?" Alessandro knelt in front of my chair, his hands covering mine. "Because they know you matter to me. Because taking you would hurt me more than any business loss ever could." The admission hung between us like a confession. In 2 weeks, I'd gone from stranger to weapon, from irrelevant college student to valuable target. The thought was terrifying, and oddly thrilling at the same time. I should call the police. The police can't help with this. Alessandro's voice was gentle but implacable. This is my world, Isabella, with its own rules and its own justice. If you want your father back alive, you have to trust me. Trust you? I barely know you. You know that I've kept you safe for months without you even realizing it. You know that I've treated you with more respect than most men would show their wives, let alone a woman they're trying to convince. Alessandro stood, moving to the window that looked out over the warehouse district. You know that I'm the only person in this city with the resources to get your father back. He was right, and we both knew it. Whatever my feelings about Alessandro and his proposition, he was my only hope of saving what was left of my family. What do they want? You, in exchange for your father's life. Alessandro turned back to me, his expression carved from stone. They think you're my weakness, Isabella. They're not wrong. The vulnerability in his admission made something flutter in my chest. This powerful, dangerous man who commanded respect and fear from everyone around him was admitting that I had the power to hurt him. If I go to them, you're not going anywhere near them. The command cracked through the air like a whip. I won't trade one life for another, especially not yours for his. He's my father. And you're... Alessandro stopped, seeming to struggle with words. You're mine to protect. The possessive statement should have angered me. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through my veins in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. So, what do? We get him back. On our terms. With our methods. Alessandro moved closer, his pale eyes holding mine with magnetic intensity. But Isabella, after today, everything changes. Once the Bratva has marked you as a target, you can never go back to your old life. What do you mean? I mean that as of this moment, you're under my protection permanently. Whether you marry me or not, whether you want it or not, you belong to me now. His hand cupped my face with surprising gentleness. The moment they decided to use you as leverage, they made you a part of this world. I should have protested, should have demanded alternatives, should have insisted on my right to choose. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawing comfort from his strength. I'm scared. Good. Fear will keep you alive. Alessandro's thumb traced across my cheekbone, and I caught the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something darker. Adrenaline, maybe, or the promise of violence. But I need you to be brave too, Isabella. I need you to trust me completely. How? By accepting that your old life is over and embracing what comes next. Alessandro leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. By saying yes to my proposal and becoming my wife in truth, not just in name. Now, with my father missing and people trying to kill us? Especially now. Alessandro pulled back to meet my eyes, his expression intense with desire and determination. Because after tonight, there won't be any going back for either of us. Before I could respond, Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Boss, we've got movement. 3 vehicles just pulled up outside the Martinez apartment. Looks like they're setting up surveillance. Alessandro's hand tightened on my face, his pale eyes blazing with cold fire. They're watching for her to come home. He turned to Marco. How long until we're ready? 2 hours, maybe 3. The men are in position, but Dimitri's holed up in that old textile factory with at least 20 guards. Then we move at midnight. Alessandro looked back at me, his expression softening slightly. Isabella, I need you to stay here where it's safe. Marco will watch over you while I get your father back. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. He's my father. My responsibility. I stood, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I won't sit here hiding while other people risk their lives for my family. Alessandro studied my face for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when his perception of me shifted. No longer the fragile college student he was protecting, but someone capable of standing beside him in darkness. If you come with me tonight, there's no going back. You'll see things, do things, become someone you never imagined you could be. His pale eyes held mine with unwavering intensity. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my father, probably terrified and alone in some abandoned building. I thought about the life I'd been living, always afraid, always struggling, always at the mercy of other people's choices. And I thought about Alessandro, dangerous and magnetic, offering me a chance to stop being a victim. Yes, Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as beautiful. Then let's go to war, Isabella Martinez. He pulled me against him, his mouth capturing mine in a kiss that tasted of desperation and promise, and the metallic tang of violence to come. When we broke apart, both of us breathing hard, something fundamental had shifted between us. I was no longer the innocent girl he was trying to protect. I was his partner in the darkness that lay ahead. 8 weeks had passed since Alessandro and I rescued my father from the Bratva. 8 weeks of living in his fortress-like mansion, of sharing meals and conversations that felt dangerously close to normal. 8 weeks of pretending I didn't notice how his touch lingered when he helped me into cars, or how his pale eyes followed me through rooms like I was something precious he couldn't bear to lose. 8 weeks of falling for a man I wasn't sure I could trust. My father had recovered from his ordeal, though the fear never fully left his eyes. Alessandro had arranged for him to stay in a secure facility, ostensibly for addiction treatment, but really for his own protection. The official story was rehabilitation. The reality was witness protection from people who still wanted him dead. But this morning, everything changed. I woke feeling nauseous. A wave of sickness that sent me stumbling to the marble bathroom Alessandro had renovated specifically for my use. As I knelt on the cold floor, retching into the pristine toilet, a terrible possibility occurred to me. When was my last period? The thought hit me like ice water. With everything that had happened, the threats, the rescue, the complete upheaval of my life, I'd stopped keeping track of normal things like menstrual cycles. But now, counting backwards, I realized I was almost 6 weeks late. 6 weeks. Right around the time Alessandro and I had first been intimate, that night of desperate fear and comfort that had led to so much more than either of us had planned. I sat on the bathroom floor, my back against the marble wall, and tried to process the implications. Pregnant. I might be carrying Alessandro Gambino's child, the heir to a criminal empire I'd stumbled into by accident. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd wanted to marry me to provide legitimate heirs, and now I might be pregnant before we'd even had a proper wedding. I needed to know for certain. The pharmacy was a 20-minute drive from Alessandro's estate, but I'd never made the trip alone. Marco or one of the other guards always accompanied me when I left the grounds. Part of the security measures Alessandro insisted were non-negotiable. But today, I couldn't face explaining why I needed a pregnancy test to one of his men. I slipped out through the kitchen entrance while Alessandro was in his office conducting business, taking the keys to the small Mercedes he'd given me for my personal use. The guards at the gate looked surprised when I approached alone, but they didn't question my right to leave. The drive into town felt like an escape, even though I knew it was temporary. For 20 minutes, I could pretend I was just a normal 22-year-old woman running errands, not the unofficial fiancée of the most powerful crime boss in the city. The pharmacy was busy with the usual afternoon crowd, and I grabbed a pregnancy test from the family planning aisle, with hands that shook only slightly. The teenage cashier barely glanced at me as she rang up my purchase, probably assuming I was just another college student dealing with the consequences of poor decision-making. If only it were that simple. I was driving back toward Alessandro's estate when I noticed the black sedan following me. At first, I thought it might be one of his security team, but the car maintained a careful distance that suggested surveillance rather than protection. My pulse quickened as I remembered Alessandro's warnings about always being watched, always being a target. I took a detour through downtown, testing whether the car would follow. It did, staying exactly 3 vehicles behind, professional and patient. Fear crept up my spine as I realized I was being hunted by someone with the skills to make it look casual. My phone rang, and Alessandro's name appeared on the screen. Relief flooded through me. "Where are you?" His voice was tight with concern. "Marco said you left the estate alone." "I needed to run an errand. I'm on my way back. But Alessandro, I think someone's following me." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make me nervous. When Alessandro spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "Describe the car. Black sedan. 2 men in the front seat. They've been behind me for 15 minutes. Drive to the warehouse district. Take Morrison Street to 5th, then turn left into the industrial complex. Don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't let them box you in. What's happening? Just drive, Isabella. I'll explain when you're safe. I followed his directions, my heart pounding as the sedan maintained its pursuit. The industrial district was mostly empty at this time of day, which made me feel more vulnerable rather than safer. When I turned into the complex Alessandro had specified, I saw why he'd chosen it. Black SUVs emerged from behind warehouses like sharks scenting blood. Alessandro's men, armed and ready, surrounded the sedan before its occupants could react. Through my rearview mirror, I watched two men in expensive suits being dragged from their vehicle at gunpoint. Alessandro appeared beside my car before I'd even put it in park, yanking open the driver's door and pulling me against his chest with desperate intensity. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over me with clinical efficiency, checking for injuries. "Did they try to approach you?" "No, they just followed me." "Alessandro, who were they?" "Bratva scouts. They've been probing our defenses for weeks, looking for weaknesses." His pale eyes blazed with cold fury. "You gave them exactly what they were looking for, a way to get to me through you." The accusation stung because it was true. My need for independence, for normalcy, had created a vulnerability that could have gotten both of us killed. "I'm sorry. You needed what was so important that you risked both our lives to get it?" Alessandro's voice was sharp with anger and fear. "What errand couldn't wait for proper security?" I looked at the pregnancy test in my purse, at the secret that might change everything between us, and realized I couldn't tell him. Not like this. Not when he was already furious with me for being reckless. Personal items. Things I was embarrassed to ask Marco to help me buy. Alessandro studied my face with that unnerving intensity, and I could see him trying to decide whether to push for more details. Marco appeared at his shoulder before he could speak. "Boss, we've got a problem. The Russians weren't just following her. They planted a tracking device on her car." Alessandro went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "How long has it been there?" "At least a week, maybe more. Professional job, nearly invisible." Marco's weathered face was grim. "They know where she goes, when she leaves, how long she's away from the estate. They've been watching me for a week?" The implications hit me like a physical blow. "They know about my father, about the treatment facility. They know everything." Alessandro's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of retribution. "Which means they've been planning something for longer than we realized." He turned to Marco, his expression shifting into the cold mask I'd learned to recognize as his business face. "Double security on the facility where Martinez is staying. I want armed guards in his room 24 hours a day, and get me everything we have on Bratva movements in the past month." "Already on it, boss." Marco hesitated, glancing between Alessandro and me. "But there's something else. Something you need to know about the tracking operation." "What?" "It wasn't just surveillance. Someone inside our organization had to give them access to plant that device." Marco's voice was heavy with implications. "We've got a leak, Alessandro. Someone close enough to know Isabella's routines, someone with access to the motor pool." The betrayal hit Alessandro like a physical blow. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the muscle that jumped in his jaw. Someone he trusted had sold him out, had put me in danger for money or leverage or fear. Who? The single word carried enough menace to make grown men confess their sins. "We're still investigating, but the list is short. Only 6 people had the access and opportunity to plant that tracker." Marco pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've already started bringing them in for questioning." Alessandro took the paper, his pale eyes scanning the names. When he reached the bottom of the list, his expression went completely blank. "No." The word was barely audible. "Not him." "Boss? Marco Torino is on this list." The silence that followed was deafening. Marco, Alessandro's right-hand man for 8 years, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd helped rescue my father and protected me when Alessandro couldn't be there. "There has to be a mistake," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I remembered things that hadn't made sense at the time. Marco's nervousness lately, his reluctance to meet Alessandro's eyes, the way he'd been making phone calls in private. "No mistake." Alessandro's voice was hollow with betrayal. "The timing fits. He's been acting strange for weeks. asking questions about our security protocols, volunteering for assignments that would give him access to sensitive information. Why would Marco betray you? Alessandro crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles white with strain. Money, fear, leverage. It doesn't matter why. He looked at me with eyes that held more pain than anger. What matters is that the person I trusted most in the world sold us both out for 30 pieces of silver. The biblical reference wasn't lost on me. Alessandro had been betrayed by someone closer than a brother, someone who'd shared his table and his trust for nearly a decade. What do we do now? Now we clean house. Alessandro pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with deadly efficiency. And then we make sure everyone understands the price of betrayal. As he made calls to set his response in motion, I stood in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, clutching a pregnancy test I hadn't had the chance to use, and realized that the man I was falling in love with was about to become someone I might not recognize. The war was coming, and this time, it would be fought with people we'd trusted, over secrets that could destroy us all. But first, I had to find out if I was carrying the heir to an empire built on blood and betrayal. The pregnancy test lay on the marble bathroom counter like an accusation. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight, confirming what my body had already been trying to tell me. Pregnant. 6 weeks along with Alessandro Gambino's child. Conceived during a night when fear and comfort had stripped away all our careful boundaries. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to see some sign of the life growing inside me. I looked the same, tired, stressed, but otherwise unchanged. Yet everything was different now. I wasn't just Isabella Martinez, the college student who'd stumbled into a criminal's world. I was carrying the heir to an empire built on violence and power. Downstairs, I could hear Alessandro's voice echoing through the mansion's corridors, sharp with anger as he coordinated the search for Marco. His most trusted lieutenant had vanished sometime during the night, taking with him 8 years of secrets and the knowledge of every weakness in the Gambino organization. The betrayal had cut Alessandro deeper than any physical wound. I'd watched him age a decade in the space of hours, his pale eyes growing cold with the kind of fury that promised retribution measured in blood rather than money. I needed to tell him about the pregnancy, but not now. Not when he was consumed with hunting down the man who'd sold us out to our enemies. This news required calm, privacy, and his full attention, none of which were available while we were essentially at war. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Isabella?" Alessandro's voice carried through the bathroom door, gentler than the tone he'd been using with his men. "Are you all right? You've been up there for over an hour." I quickly shoved the pregnancy test into the trash and opened the door, hoping my face didn't reveal the secret I was carrying. "I'm fine. Just tired." Alessandro studied me with those unnerving pale eyes, taking in details I hoped weren't as obvious as they felt. "You look pale. Are you feeling sick? It's been a stressful day." Not entirely a lie, though stress was the least of my problems at the moment. He reached out, his fingers cool against my forehead. "No fever. But you should rest. I've increased security around the estate. Nobody gets in or out without my personal authorization." "Have you found Marco?" Alessandro's expression hardened. "He's gone to ground, probably with Bratva protection. But we'll find him. Betrayal like this can't go unanswered, Isabella. It sends the wrong message to everyone who depends on our strength." I watched him transform before my eyes. The man who'd touched my face with gentle concern becoming the ruthless leader who commanded fear and respect throughout the city. It was a reminder that no matter how tender he could be with me, Alessandro Gambino was still a dangerous man. "What will happen when you find him? What always happens to traitors." Alessandro's voice was matter of fact, devoid of emotion. "Marco made his choice when he sold us out. Now he'll face the consequences." The casual way he discussed murder should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself nodding, understanding that in this world, betrayal was a capital offense. Marco had put both our lives at risk, had endangered my father, had sold information that could have gotten me killed. In Alessandro's world, that debt could only be paid in blood. "I need to check on something at the facility where your father is staying," Alessandro continued, his hand finding mine. "Will you be safe here for a few hours?" "Of course. Where else would I go?" Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, that I wasn't fighting him on the security measures. I've left instructions with the guard detail. You're not to leave the estate grounds for any reason. Understood? Understood. Alessandro leaned down and kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. This will be over soon, Isabella. Once we've dealt with Marco and sent the Bratva a message they won't forget, we can go back to planning our future. Our future. If only he knew how much more complicated that future had become. After Alessandro left, I found myself wandering through the mansion's empty corridors, my thoughts churning with possibilities and fears. The house that had become my sanctuary now felt like a beautiful prison, its luxury unable to distract from the violence brewing just beyond its walls. I was in Alessandro's study, looking through the architectural books he'd bought for me, when the phone rang. Not Alessandro's private line, but the main house number that only family and close associates knew. Gambino residence. I'd learned to answer with the proper formality. Isabella? The voice was unfamiliar, male, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Isabella Martinez? Ice flooded my veins. Who is this? A friend of Marco's. He's very concerned about your well-being. I should have hung up immediately, should have called security, should have done anything except continue the conversation. But fear had frozen my vocal cords. Marco asked me to give you a message, the voice continued, smooth and confident. He wants you to know that Alessandro isn't the man you think he is. I don't want to hear this. Your father's debt? It was never $2 million. Alessandro inflated the numbers, created a crisis that didn't exist, so he could manipulate you into his bed. The words hit like physical blows. Marco has the original documents, Isabella. Proof that your father owed less than $50,000. You're lying. Am I? Think about it. How convenient that Alessandro appeared in your life just as you were becoming desperate enough to consider drastic measures. How perfectly timed that the Bratva decided to target you just when you were starting to question his motives. My legs gave out, and I sank into Alessandro's leather chair, the phone trembling in my hand. What are you saying? I'm saying that Alessandro Gambino orchestrated everything from the beginning. The debt, the threats, even the attack on your father. All carefully designed to make you dependent on his protection. The voice was patient, almost kind. Marco discovered the truth and tried to warn you. That's why he had to disappear. That's impossible. Is it? When did you first notice Alessandro's men watching you? Was it really for your protection, or was it to make sure you didn't discover the truth about your father's real debt? The questions hit too close to home. I remembered the months of subtle surveillance, the way Alessandro always seemed to know exactly where I was and what I was doing. I'd thought it was protection, but what if it had been control? Marco is safe, the voice continued. But he's worried about you, Isabella. He knows Alessandro will never let you go voluntarily. You're too valuable to him now. Valuable how? You carry his child. The words stopped my heart. How do you know that? Marco pays attention to details. He's been watching you for weeks. Notice the signs Alessandro has been too distracted to see. The voice softened with something like sympathy. That baby makes you incredibly powerful, Isabella. The heir to the Gambino Empire has tremendous value to Alessandro's enemies. What do you want? To offer you a choice. Real freedom, not the gilded cage Alessandro has built for you. Marco can arrange for you to disappear, to start over somewhere safe with your child. And my father will be protected as part of the arrangement. The Bratva has no interest in hurting an innocent man. I closed my eyes, trying to process what I was hearing. If it was true, if Alessandro had manipulated everything from the beginning, then nothing I'd believed about our relationship was real. The tenderness, the protection, the way he looked at me like I mattered. All of it would be an elaborate lie designed to secure his heir. But if it was false, if Marco was trying to turn me against Alessandro out of spite or fear, then I was playing into the hands of people who wanted to destroy everything we'd built together. I need time to think. Time is something you don't have. Alessandro will be back soon, and once he realizes you know the truth, he won't let you out of his sight. The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. There's a car waiting at the service entrance behind the kitchen. The guards have been distracted by a small incident at the front gate. You have maybe 10 minutes to decide. 10 minutes to throw away everything? 10 minutes to save yourself and your child from a life of beautiful captivity. The line went quiet for a moment. Your father would want you to be free, Isabella. More than anything, he'd want you to have the choice he never could give you. The phone went dead, leaving me alone in Alessandro's study with the weight of an impossible decision. Through the windows, I could see movement near the front gate, some kind of commotion that had drawn the guards' attention away from the main house. I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my bathroom trash, about the future Alessandro envisioned for us. Marriage, children, a life of luxury built on violence and control. About the possibility that everything I'd believed was a lie designed to trap me. And I thought about the alternative. Running into the unknown with strangers who claimed to offer freedom, but might be leading me into something worse. The sound of a car engine drifted through the windows from somewhere behind the house. My ride to freedom, or my path to destruction. I had to choose, and I had less than 10 minutes to decide whether to trust the man I was falling in love with, or the voice on the phone promising me truths I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. The pregnancy test in the trash seemed to mock me with its certainty. 2 pink lines that had changed everything, regardless of which choice I made. But as I sat in Alessandro's chair, surrounded by the books he'd bought for me and the life he'd built around me, I realized that my decision had already been made the moment I'd seen those 2 pink lines. I was carrying his child. Whatever else might be true or false, whatever games might be being played around me, that baby was real, and that baby deserved better than to be born into a war between people who claimed to care about me. I walked to the kitchen, past the service entrance where a car waited in the shadows, and picked up the phone to call Alessandro. Isabella? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to hear your voice, and I wanted to know, when I told him about the pregnancy, whether his reaction would reveal a man who truly loved me, or one who'd finally secured his perfect pawn. I'll be home soon. Are you sure you're all right? I'm sure, I lied, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. I'm exactly where I need to be. Whether that was true remained to be seen. But I was done running from the truth, whatever form it might take. The war came to us at dawn, 3 days after the phone call that had nearly torn my world apart. I'd chosen to trust Alessandro, chosen to believe that whatever manipulation might exist in our relationship, his feelings for me were genuine. But doubt lingered like a poison in my veins, making me question every touch, every tender word, every promise of protection. I still hadn't told him about the pregnancy. Isabella, get away from the windows. Alessandro's voice cut through my morning reverie like a blade. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, fully dressed despite the early hour, his pale eyes scanning the grounds beyond the glass with predatory alertness. What's wrong? Movement in the tree line. At least 20 men, probably more. He was already reaching for the gun he kept in the nightstand, his movements efficient and deadly calm. The Bratva is making their move. Through the bulletproof glass, I could see dark figures moving between the trees that bordered Alessandro's estate. They advanced with military precision, using the landscape for cover as they surrounded the mansion like a noose drawing tight. Where's my father? Safe. I moved him to a secondary location yesterday when our intelligence suggested this was coming. Alessandro checked his weapon with practiced ease, then tucked a second gun into his waistband. But, Isabella, there's something you need to know before this starts. The serious tone in his voice made my stomach clench with dread. What? We found Marco. I turned from the window, studying his face for clues about what this meant. Is he alive? He's alive. But what he told us... Alessandro's jaw tightened with controlled fury. The Bratva has been planning this for months, Isabella. The attack on your father, the surveillance, even Marco's betrayal. It was all orchestrated to separate us from our allies and leave us vulnerable. How? They knew Marco had gambling debts. They've been slowly buying his loyalty for over a year, feeding him just enough money to keep him dependent while gathering intelligence about our operations. Alessandro moved to the window, his gaze tracking movement in the distance. The night they took your father, Marco gave them our security protocols. He thought he was just helping them grab a random kidnapping victim for ransom. But then why did he help rescue Dad? Because by then he realized he was in too deep to get out. The Bratva doesn't let people walk away, Isabella. Once you're compromised, you either serve them completely or you die. Alessandro's voice carried the weight of hard experience. Marco chose to serve them. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was coming. Marco, who'd protected me, who'd seemed genuinely loyal to Alessandro, had been playing a double game that could have gotten us all killed. But there's more, Alessandro continued, his pale eyes meeting mine with startling intensity. The phone call you received 3 days ago. That was Marco. He was trying to get you to run because the Bratva promised to spare your life if he could deliver you to them voluntarily. My blood turned to ice. They wanted me alive? They want you alive because you're carrying my heir. Alessandro's gaze dropped to my still flat stomach, and I saw knowledge in his eyes that made my knees weak. Did you think I wouldn't notice, Isabella? The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the way you've been avoiding wine at dinner. He knew. Alessandro had known about the pregnancy, possibly longer than I had, and he'd been waiting for me to tell him. The realization that he'd been protecting not just me, but our unborn child, made something shift inside my chest. How long have you known? 2 weeks. Since you started falling asleep during our evening conversations and couldn't tolerate the smell of coffee. Alessandro moved closer, his hand coming up to cup my face with infinite gentleness. I've been waiting for you to trust me enough to share the news. I was afraid you'd think I did it on purpose. To trap you. Isabella. His thumb traced across my cheekbone, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. I've been hoping for this since the first night we were together. You carrying my child isn't a trap. It's a gift I never thought I deserved. Before I could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere on the grounds. Alessandro immediately pushed me away from the window, his protective instincts overriding everything else. The panic room. Now. He guided me toward a section of wall that looked identical to the rest, but concealed a hidden door. You'll be safe there until this is over. I'm not hiding while you fight a war. You're carrying my child, Isabella. That changes everything. Alessandro's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I won't risk both of you for the sake of your pride. More gunfire, closer this time, accompanied by shouts in multiple languages. Through the windows, I could see muzzle flashes lighting up the pre-dawn darkness like deadly fireworks. Alessandro, there's something else. I caught his arm as he started to turn away. The phone call from Marco. He said my father's original debt was only $50,000. That you inflated it to manipulate me. Alessandro went very still, his pale eyes searching my face. And you believed him? I don't know what to believe anymore. Then believe this. Alessandro pulled out his phone, scrolling through files until he found what he was looking for. Your father's gambling debts, documented by 3 different organizations over 2 years. The total comes to just over $2.3 million. The numbers on the screen made my head spin. Detailed records of bets placed, money borrowed, interest compounded at rates that would have made legitimate lenders blanch. It wasn't just the $50,000 Marco had claimed. It was a systematic destruction of any hope my father might have had for financial redemption. Marco lied to you, Isabella. The Bratva coached him on exactly what to say to make you doubt me, to make you vulnerable to their promises of rescue. Alessandro tucked the phone away, his expression grim. They needed you to come willingly, because taking you by force would have started a war they weren't ready to fight. But they're fighting it now, because their subtle approach failed. You chose to trust me instead of running with them. Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade. Now they have to try to take by force what they couldn't acquire through deception. An explosion rocked the mansion, sending picture frames tumbling from walls and rattling the bulletproof windows. Alessandro immediately wrapped his arms around me, shielding me from falling debris. The panic room, Isabella, please. But as he spoke, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Alessandro glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. It's them. They want to negotiate. He answered on speaker, his voice deadly calm. You have something to say, Dimitri? Alessandro Gambino. The voice was smooth, cultured, with the faint accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. I believe we have something to discuss. I don't negotiate with people who attack my home, not even to save the life of your unborn child. The question sent ice through my veins. We know Isabella is pregnant, Alessandro. We know that heir represents the future of your entire organization. Get to the point. The point is simple. You have something we want, and we have something you want. Your father-in-law is safe for now, but that could change very quickly if you don't listen to reason. My father. Despite Alessandro's assurances, the Bratva had somehow gotten to him. I saw the moment Alessandro realized the same thing, saw the cold fury that transformed his features into something terrifying. What do you want? Isabella, unharmed and willing. In exchange, Marcus Martinez lives, and we withdraw from your territory permanently. Dimitri's voice was patient, reasonable, as if he were discussing a simple business transaction. You have 1 hour to consider the offer. And if I refuse? Then we kill the old man, storm your fortress, and take what we want anyway. The only difference is how many people die in the process. The line went dead, leaving us in silence, broken only by the distant sound of gunfire and the hammering of my own heart. They have my father. I know. Alessandro's voice was hollow with self-recrimination. I thought the facility was secure. I thought, it doesn't matter what you thought. The words came out harder than I intended, fueled by fear and adrenaline and the terrible certainty that this was my fault. They have him because of me, because I'm a liability you can't protect. Isabella. No. I stepped back, putting distance between us even as another explosion shook the mansion. I won't let my father die because I was too selfish to make the hard choice. You're not going anywhere near them. It's not your decision to make. I met his pale eyes with all the determination I could muster. I'm not your possession, Alessandro. I'm not something you own. You're carrying my child, and that child deserves to grow up with grandparents, not just the blood money from their grandfather's death. I moved toward the door, driven by a certainty that felt like destiny. I have to do this. Alessandro stepped into my path, his expression desperate. They'll kill you the moment they have what they want. Maybe. But if I don't go, they'll definitely kill my father. I reached up, touching his face with hands that only trembled slightly. And then they'll come for us anyway. There has to be another way. There is. I smiled, hoping it looked more confident than I felt. You trust me to be strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Before Alessandro could stop me, I was running toward the sound of gunfire, toward the men who wanted to use me as a weapon against the father of my unborn child. Behind me, I heard Alessandro shouting my name, heard his footsteps as he gave chase. But I had a head start, and desperation driving me forward. The war had come to our doorstep, and it was time to end it. 7 months later, I stood in the private wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, watching our daughter sleep in her bassinet beside the bed, where I'd nearly died bringing her into the world. Sophia Grace Gambino had arrived 3 weeks early, as if she couldn't wait to join the empire her parents had built from blood and betrayal. The war with the Bratva had ended that dawn, when I'd walked into their temporary headquarters, not as their victim, but as their executioner. Dimitri had made the fatal mistake of assuming that pregnancy had made me weak, that carrying Alessandro's heir meant I could be used as leverage against him. He'd been wrong. The gun I'd taken from Alessandro's desk had felt surprisingly light in my hands, as I'd put 3 bullets into Dimitri's chest. The man who'd orchestrated months of terror, who'd used my father as bait and Marco as a puppet, had died with surprise written across his patrician features. Marco had been there, chained like a dog in the corner of the warehouse, his face a map of bruises and regret. The Bratva had kept their word about keeping him alive, but they'd made sure he understood the price of betrayal. When I'd freed him after eliminating his captors, he'd wept like a child. I'm sorry, he'd whispered, over and over. Isabella, I'm so sorry. They said they'd kill my daughter if I didn't cooperate. I never meant for it to go this far. I'd forgiven him, but Alessandro never would. Marco now lived in permanent exile, his gambling debts paid, and his daughter's medical bills covered, but forbidden from ever returning to the city or contacting anyone from his old life. It was mercy of a sort, though I suspected Marco would have preferred death to the isolation Alessandro had imposed. My father had been found in the basement of the same warehouse, physically unharmed but mentally shattered by his ordeal. The addiction treatment Alessandro had arranged had helped with the gambling, but the trauma of being kidnapped and used as leverage against his daughter had left deeper scars. He was clean now, sober for the first time in years, working as head accountant for one of Alessandro's legitimate construction companies. The job gave him purpose and dignity, while keeping him under protection that looked like ordinary employment. He'd walked me down the aisle 6 months ago, tears streaming down his face as he placed my hand in Alessandro's. Our wedding had been a masterpiece of controlled violence wrapped in silk and flowers. Representatives from every major crime family on the East Coast had attended, some as allies, others as carefully managed threats. The ceremony itself had taken place in a private chapel on Long Island, with security so extensive that the FBI had mistaken it for a summit meeting. I'd worn Alessandro's grandmother's dress, altered to accommodate my growing belly, and carried a bouquet of white roses that concealed a small pistol, a wedding gift from my new husband. The symbolism hadn't been lost on anyone present. Isabella Gambino was not a woman to be trifled with. Mrs. Gambino? The nurse's voice was soft, respectful in the way that expensive private medical care demanded. Your husband is here to see you. Alessandro entered the room like he owned it, which, considering the size of his donation to the hospital's pediatric wing, he essentially did. He looked older than his 28 years, the weight of leadership and recent fatherhood adding gravity to his pale eyes. But when he saw me holding our daughter, his expression softened into something that still took my breath away. How are you feeling? Tired. Sore. Happy. I shifted carefully, making room for him on the hospital bed. She's perfect, isn't she? Alessandro settled beside me, his large hands impossibly gentle as he took Sophia from my arms. The sight of this dangerous man cradling our tiny daughter never failed to move me. He spoke to her in Italian, words of love and protection that I was slowly learning to understand. The business? Thriving. Our expansion into legitimate enterprises is ahead of schedule, and the construction company your father manages just won a contract to build the new federal courthouse. Alessandro's smile was sharp with irony. The FBI will be working in a building constructed with Gambino money. And the other families? Respectful. Word has spread about what you did to Dimitri. No one wants to test the woman who eliminated the Bratva's leadership while 6 months pregnant. Alessandro's pride in my accomplishments was unmistakable. You've become something of a legend, Isabella. The queen who protects her king. It was an accurate description. In the months following the warehouse incident, I'd transformed from protected asset to active partner in Alessandro's empire. My architectural background had proven invaluable in designing buildings that served dual purposes. Legitimate businesses on the surface, with hidden spaces and escape routes that allowed for less legal activities when necessary. The daycare center I'd designed served real children from the community, while also functioning as a meeting place for sensitive negotiations. The medical clinic provided genuine health care to underserved populations, while serving as a neutral zone where disputes could be resolved without violence. I'd become the acceptable face of the Gambino family's charitable work, the respectable young mother who could sit on hospital boards and university committees while quietly ensuring that our interests were protected. There's something else, Alessandro said, his voice taking on the tone that meant serious business. The commission has extended an invitation. They want to meet you formally. The commission, the governing body that theoretically controlled organized crime activities across the country. Being invited to address them was recognition that I'd moved beyond being Alessandro's wife to being a power in my own right. When? Next month, when you've recovered from the delivery. It's largely ceremonial, but it establishes you as my official partner rather than just my spouse. Alessandro shifted Sophia to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. It also means that any attack on you will be considered an attack on me by every family in the organization. Protection through fear. Protection through respect. There's a difference. Alessandro's pale eyes met mine with perfect understanding. You've earned this, Isabella. Not through me, but through your own choices and actions. It was true. The woman who'd hidden from rain in a stranger's car no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone capable of pulling a trigger without hesitation when her family was threatened. But I was also someone who could design schools that served real children, who could manage charitable foundations that genuinely helped people, who could be a mother to the tiny girl sleeping in her father's arms. I have a proposal, I said, watching Alessandro's expression for his reaction. I want to establish a scholarship program, full rides to college for the children of our employees, legitimate and otherwise. Expensive. Worth it. Education is the best investment we can make in the next generation. I reached out to stroke Sophia's downy hair. I want our daughter to grow up in a world where intelligence is valued as much as loyalty. And if some of those scholarship recipients decide they want nothing to do with our world, then they'll have the education and resources to build better lives for themselves. That's a win for everyone. I met Alessandro's gaze steadily. Not every problem can be solved with violence, Alessandro. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is give people choices. Alessandro considered this, his expression thoughtful. You want to reform the system from within. I want to build something that lasts longer than we do. Something Sophia can be proud of whether she chooses to be part of it or not. And if she chooses differently, if she wants a normal life, I looked at our daughter, perfect and innocent in her father's arms, and felt the fierce protectiveness that had driven me to kill for her before she was even born. Then she'll have that choice. But she'll have it from a position of strength, with resources and education, and the knowledge that she's loved unconditionally. I smiled, thinking of the trust funds Alessandro had already established, the legitimate businesses that would provide clean money for whatever future Sophia chose. We're not just building a criminal empire, Alessandro. We're building a legacy. Sophia stirred in her father's arms, her tiny fist closing around his finger with the instinctive grip of a child claiming her birthright. When she opened her eyes, they were the same pale blue as Alessandro's, but somehow warmer, full of possibility rather than calculation. She's going to be formidable, Alessandro murmured, wonder in his voice. She's going to be free, I corrected. Free to choose her own path, her own values, her own definition of power. Through the hospital window, the city spread out before us like a chessboard, full of territories to be claimed and alliances to be forged. I was Isabella Gambino now, wife to a king and mother to a princess, architect of an empire that served both darkness and light. The frightened girl who'd worked double shifts to pay her father's debts had died in that warehouse 7 months ago, reborn as someone who understood that true power came not from fear, but from the ability to protect what mattered most. Our daughter would inherit wealth and influence beyond measure, but more importantly, she would inherit the knowledge that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it meant pulling a trigger to protect your family. Sometimes it meant building schools to educate other people's children. And sometimes it meant choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over the cynicism that could so easily consume everything good in the world. Alessandro leaned over to kiss my forehead, careful not to disturb the baby between us. I love you, Isabella Martinez Gambino. I love you too, I whispered, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility, full of people who would never know how their fates were shaped by decisions made in hospital rooms and boardrooms, in warehouses and wedding chapels. But that was tomorrow's concern. Today, we were just a family, dangerous and devoted in equal measure, building something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy us. The empire would endure. But more importantly, so would we.